then you have this amazing story about Canadian Tire, which was totally new to me, and I follow retail a lot, about Canadian Tire discovered that men weren't shopping as much as they used to. I mean, what's Canadian Tire without men? But their level of engagement was going down, and they wanted to know why, and they didn't just do a quick and dirty survey. They took, what, a year?
A year.
Yeah.
Something they called the Darwin Project. And they really let me into the process, which is why it hadn't been really publicized.
Oh, okay.
But it was a fascinating, and again, the lessons we can take from it are important. And one of the key lessons was they didn't go for the easy conclusions, because they got conclusions really early. Why are men not shopping at Canadian Tire anymore? Well, you got Debbie Travis with paints over there, and it's kind of irritating the guy who doesn't want to see that stuff. His wife's got that at home. They didn't go for that. What they said was, what is the Canadian male? What is the Canadian male? That was their agenda, and it took a year. And they did ethnography, and they did surveys, and they did focus groups, and it was in-depth.
They did,
And
yes.
they refused to say, there's our answer. They just gathered it and gathered it and gathered it, and the findings are fascinating. I don't want to give it all away, but I mean, a couple of things that really are fascinating. Canadian men are happy if their relationships are good. So their relationship with their significant other defines how happy they're going to be. And second, they want to have fun. They want that relationship to be fun, if at all possible. If it's not, they're going to go look for fun somewhere else. And so if you think of the advertising around males, until the last couple of years, this research influenced advertising everywhere. The advertising around males had two types of guys. There was your beer-drinking, girl-loving caveman guy, and there was doofus dad. Oh, dad, you don't know where that's kept, right? Those are the two guys. There was no guy that the real guys could relate to. So they would see this, like the doofus and the caveman, and they think, that's not me. And then, so I'll just tell you the ad that came after the Darwin Project experience. It came out during the Vancouver Olympics. And it was the total result of their understanding of what makes Canadian guys tick. And I don't know if you guys remember it, but there's no speaking in this ad. It says new skates, there's text on the screen, and you see a new pair of skates in a box, and you see an excited little boy and his dad, and you see somebody lacing up skates, and then they're going on an outdoor rink, and you see the little boy skating perfectly well onto the ice and reaching his hand back for dad, who's taking a first tentative step. And like it's an amazing ad, and it still like makes your it's about family and you know their shared experience. He's not a doofus, and that's sort of what came out of it. And they completely turned their connection with their customer around and their sales as well.
Now, I know we don't want to give away all the stories, and this is right at the beginning, so it was just so dramatic about a guy who's invented a saw that won't slice your finger off, and he's putting his own finger in harm's way just to make sure that it worked or not.
Yeah.
How did you find him anyway?
Steve Gass, Google, honestly,
Okay.
literally,
Oh, really?
like it was
Wow.
sort of neat innovations. The table saw cuts off a phenomenal number of fingers a day. And as he will tell you, they move so fast, and our human reflexes are so slow that by the time you've misplaced your hand, by the time you feel pain, you've lost 3 fingers. Like it's just that fast. And he was in his workshop one day, and he looked at his table saw, and he thought, how come we can't make that stop on contact? Wouldn't that be good? And we have the technology. Now we know it from the Apple touchscreen stuff. Back then, it was pre-touchscreen. Remember those lamps that would turn on when you touched them? Like, where did those go? I guess we didn't need those.
Like the garage door that goes back up again.
Right.
Yeah.
It can sense the human touch. And so he innovated it, came up with a product, tested it on hot dogs, worked like a charm. And he knew that nobody was going to buy it unless a human finger had been stuck in the blade. And he couldn't ask anybody else. So he tells the story of standing in his workshop, sticking his hand into a moving blade. And even though he believed in his product, he'd spent, at that point, 1.5 years on it, it took physical strength he almost didn't have. Because your brain is very powerful. The reptilian brain is in there saying, don't do it. But he forced himself, and it worked. And now it's widely available. Interestingly, completely resisted by saw manufacturers everywhere, because they don't want to transfer the liability from you, dummy with your hand in the wrong place, to them, maker of the saw. But anyway, he's making some inroads, and it's a good story.
Makes a little tiny scratch, right?
It bleeds a little bit, it does, but you still got your fingers.
Yeah. So I think we'll open it up to questions, and are there mics? We've got some time for questions. Okay? One of the things I liked was your expression, Control-Alt-Delete. You do that to yourself and to your work.
Wipe the slate clean.
Right.
Because one of the things that's super powerful is the status quo bias. And so with Canadian Tire, that was where that idea came up of just start with a blank canvas and see where you go. And especially when you're brainstorming in a business sense, that can be very, very important. Not to get stuck in sort of the answers that make you happy or seem right.
Are you waiting to ask? Yes, okay.
Hi, Amanda. I just wanted to know some of the role models that you have had in your life and how much of a significance they played in your book.
Role models
I've had. I mean, I've been lucky to have some really good ones. Partly because I trained as an architect, and so I didn't know anything about journalism. And so there were people who understood I needed kind of mentors and guides. And so there have been a bunch of them. I'm not sure I need to single them out, but they're people who really took chances on me and made me a believer in taking chances on people. So, I'll single some of them out. But Jack Fleischman, who gave me a job in television, even though I should not have had a job in television. Marianne McNellis was the editor who sent me to New York. There are people who just kind of, for whatever reason, took a chance. And so I've become a big believer in doing that for others.
By the way, that story that you wrote for Moneyville, which is the Star's personal finance site, about going to New York and how that was one of your big mistakes because you hadn't really financed it or thought about financing, that's still one of the most popular stories, and people search for it all the time.
And people get quite irate about it. So when I lived in New York, I lived way beyond my means. But it's not my fault. I was not paid very well. I lived to the means to which I hoped to become accustomed. So what I did was made a conscious effort to go into debt to travel and to have experiences there that I wouldn't have otherwise been able to afford, knowing that I was going to leave to a much saner lifestyle here one day, probably at a higher salary, and that would all work out. And the bad news for people for whom this was like a series of terrible things to do is that it did all work out. So I'm a terrible example, and that's why people get quite upset by that article, but it's all true.
Yes.
This has to do with dysfunctional political system of our neighbors to the south. Could you comment on the fiscal cliff and whether it means anything at all or whatever? Thank you.
Fiscal cliff. It does mean something. I think for our purposes, it's more useful to think of it like a fiscal staircase. There's no cliff we're going over. It'll happen. I think the number I saw today actually is 1.6 billion a day rather than 600 billion right off the bat. But still, it's 1.6 is better than 600. What I will say, this is everybody knows that the fiscal cliff is now, it's the combination of spending reductions they've agreed to and a tax increase that all happens at the same time, which would be fine if you're trying to reduce a deficit. Those both sound like good things, but the U.S. is in such fragile shape that they think it'll send it back into recession and we will follow. But I'm seeing, and you must be seeing the same thing, very optimistic commentary in the last couple of days that they will resolve this, that there will be some agreement around what the tax cuts will look like or phasing in spending reductions, and that they won't actually allow the world's biggest, most dynamic economy to go off a cliff. And I'm going to stay with optimism on that one.
I'm seeing some optimism too.
Yeah.
You were talking about, you said your book is productivity and innovation. You've talked about many separate examples, but what I'm trying to understand is that North America, to me, cannot exist without innovation.
Yes.
And it seems that most of the stuff is getting outsourced. Are we going to be able to hang on to the innovation so that our children, grandchildren can be prosperous?
I hope we are. I mean, we're actually at an interesting phase of our economic development, in the sense that we can choose, as we have in the past, incidentally. Every major kind of economic turning point was determined by governments. The whole notion that, the invisible hand and the free market will put you on the right path is kind of hogwash when you think about sort of every important turning point. Some collective of people made a decision about what they wanted their world to look like, whether through regulation or actual through industrial policy, God forbid. So do we want to be a nation of innovators rather than outsourcers, rather than people who just dig up oil and cut down trees? I think we all agree we do. There isn't any reason, and this is what motivated me to write this book, there's no reason why we can't be that. We are intelligent, well-educated, well-connected, technically oriented people, and there isn't any reason why, especially if we unleash our own inner desire, get over our fear of failure, accept risk as a way of life, that we can't be leaders in the world.
Chinese people are very innovative too, but more and more.
Yes, people often point to China as sort of a threat to us, but I will say that the jury is out on how a lot plays out in China. I mean, first of all, there is the entire equation of social unrest, right? There's 80 million people who are very wealthy in China, and 1+ billion who are not. And, you know, and maybe haven't yet cottoned on that some of those people at the very top are billionaires now because of resource reallocation. So the social issue is one question. Leave that aside. People often talk about the number of engineers China pumps out, and it's totally true. They are educating engineers at a fantastic rate. Are they educating engineers who are innovative? I don't know. Is it a culture that actually allows for free thinking, risk-taking? I think the answer might be no. I think there might actually be cultural barriers. Very good, qualified, technical engineers in China, no question. Are they going to be the next Steve Jobs? Are they going to be the next Henry Fords? I don't know. I wouldn't count America out on that front yet. Yeah.
You're from a family of politicians. You sounded like a politician right now. Any plans?
No plans. No plans.
No, but we do remember your father with great comfort and kindness. Thank you. I think the innovation and so forth theory is an excellent opportunity for us, and you're hitting on the precise difference between us and Asians. Japanese, et cetera, have had history of merely copying rather than innovating, and this is a distinct advantage for us. But looking at the Americans, they seem to be constantly, productivity-wise, heads and shoulders over Canadians. I'm wondering if there's a component of myth of society or super confidence that we lack, that is a desperate need that we have to somehow supplant, because we're just not going to do it compared to Americans.
Politeness, which you talk about.
You know, and I've actually wondered whether it's not the subject of another book. It is not in this book, whether there's something cultural about our country that's holding us back. But it is something I think we may need to explore. And one of the reasons that it came up is I would give my speech on innovation and productivity, and one day I was giving it to a group of CEOs of consumer products companies, which means CEOs of US subsidiaries. And I've just raised that question with no research, just kind of a hunch. Is it something in the water here that, you know? And afterwards, 3 US-born CEOs sought me out to say, you're absolutely onto something. And they wanted to share their stories. And so I got them together in a room to talk about what it is about Canada, and they have very compelling stories. I mean, one of them remembers the first time his kid came home from a Mississauga high school and said, "Dad, I got an A." And he looked at it and he said, "That's an 82%, and that son is a B." They call it the Canadian A. The B+ is what it is. And the more that I think about it, I wonder whether, and this again, completely unfounded in research, so forgive me, but when you create a society with really ingrained values of healthcare, which means nobody's left behind, right? Equalization, which means we share things. Does that create a kind of a ceiling on our willingness to stick our necks out, to really risk, to really gamble? And so I'm not saying I think we should rip up healthcare or equalization because they're holding us back. But if that's the case, we do need to start thinking about how we embed in our kids, because it's too late for some of us, embed in our kids the idea that you can all be equal, nobody's going to get, you know, completely left behind, but we also want champions. And we also want people who are going to fail spectacularly. That's what I love about America, right? Americans, they don't just fail, they fail spectacularly. We need more of that. That's what we should be striving for.
You do talk about how when we're in a group brainstorming, including your own TV show, you're sometimes, as Canadians, too polite to each other. We're not willing to really say, you know, that's garbage, let's start all over again. And we often do much less as a group. We always think that the way to get ahead is to brainstorm, but we're much better off doing it all on our own.
Yes, although this is one of the places technology saves us. I mean, the research shows that if you need to brainstorm, do it from your computers, because it saves you from the biggest impediment to brainstorming in a group is waiting your turn. You're waiting to speak, and you've lost the moment. The girls who invented the socket in that dorm room, they were talking over each other. They don't remember who said what exactly. Were you the one that mentioned the bicycle that's kinetic, and you mentioned soccer? They don't know. Yeah. They were all talking at once. So if you could do that, do it. But if not, go to your separate corners and get on some kind of online system and brainstorm electronically, because it actually allows you to be freed from politeness. And politeness is just the death of creativity.
Hi. This may sound like a funny question, but I was wondering if you have any advice for innovators fitting into a corporate culture that may be more comfortable with the status quo and not hearing those why questions, actually.
It's not a funny question, it is the question, because most of us are in environments that don't welcome why. Most of our workplaces don't actually want us to question anything. The answer, as far as I'm concerned, is to make it a personal issue. So what you get when you engage and start to question is a better connection to what you're doing. So you're going to do your job better, and you're going to enjoy it better. The person in the next cubicle, I think, will find that a little contagious. It doesn't mean you're going to suddenly make, you know, CBC the most innovative place on earth. It just doesn't work that way, because innovation inside a big structure, a big entity, is top down. It really is. I mean, the biggest impediments to innovation at work are HR, IT, and the CEO. Literally. Yeah. Now, the biggest facilitators to innovation internally can be HR, IT, and the CEO. But when they're working against you, they really are, you put a structure in place and it's a problem. So the advice I would have is to take it on as a personal thing, because you'll enjoy it. There's no downside. If you actually unleash your inner innovator, you will start having more fun. I think other people will notice.
It does make people uneasy, though, I think. Those questions, those...
Absolutely. Yeah. And I guess that's something that we all need to kind of work through. And there's a way to do it, right? Because we're dealing with people who are used to behaving a certain way, we need to be gentle sometimes with people. Give them my book.
Only plug of the night so far.
Right.